So yesterday I was sharing with everybody that, the root of when I got into all this stuff, I wanted to know about the root of religion. I wanted to know about the root of all civilization. Was there something that we can track it back to? And in that process, I traced back a lot of Indus civilization heritage to the land of Kush, right? And the land of Kush, they crossed the Red Sea, went through Yemen, and they ended up in what is now known as what was then known as the Indus civilization, which is over here. So the land of Kush, in just south of Egypt, over there, and then migrated into this land. Many other tribes probably migrated there too, but definitely the descendants of the land of Kush went into Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, in the Indus civilization around this area, and probably took place around 3000 to 2600 BC. Then we have the migration also of the Aryans that came in from the north and came down into India. But this is where I want to start today. So that was just kind of just showing people what we spoke about yesterday. But let's talk about now, because this presentation is about origin stories, the origin of humanity. How did we all come to this place? By my exploration of over 180 different origin stories, I found a lot of similarities. But one origin story that really stood out to me was definitely the Vedic one, since that's my ancestry. Not only am I Indian from India, that I was raised Hindu, and Vedas was the origin of that, but even the sect of Hinduism that my family followed was actually exclusively Vedic Hinduism. In Vedic Hinduism, it has a specific name. I forget it right now. That's a Sanskrit name. And within Vedic Hinduism, there's not so much concentration on the deities. It's more about the principles and the philosophy. The deities really, even though they came about the Rig Veda time, really didn't start manifesting fully until Vedic awareness eventually became Hinduism. So in Vedic origin story, there is no one origin story in the Hindu text. The period when the Vedas were composed became known as the Vedic period and lasted from around 1500 BC to around 500 BCE. It was very ritualistic. So, uh, contrary to what many people might believe, is that even though there's a high level of spirituality, at that point, it became very ritualistic. That if you do this and this and this, the gods or consciousness or source or whatever would give you this in return. So, after a period of, this being passed down by verbally for thousands of years, it finally started getting written down onto actual text around 1500 BC. And at that point, it became contractual that I do this, and then you can give me this. And Hinduism today has become very much like that as well. So there are many similar stories. Hey, Omar.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you a question on this.
Yeah.
The sacrifices that you were saying, now, are those animal sacrifices or is there
No,
like human sacrifice happening there as well?
I'm not talking about sacrifice. I'm talking about rituals. So not sacrificial rituals. I mean, for example, when people go to the Hindu temple and they have a coconut and they
Mhm,
have this fruit and then they offer it to the gods,
mhm.
right?
Yeah,
Those are the rituals.
I see.
It
Okay.
would be like, okay, it would be like your family needs to get abundance in order to be able to do this. Well, this is the step-by-step process of what you need to do to for God. You need to say this hymn 3 times. You need to walk around that fire 4 times. You need to bow on the ground 10 times, and then God will give you that.
Kind of like the Indian wedding ceremony, right? Where you
Exactly.
tie the knot when you walk around the fire in
Yeah.
a circle 3 times, and then you do the opposite circle 3 times, and then
Yeah.
the union is pretty much, confirmed.
Yeah, and there's many different rituals, so I'm just giving you a
Yeah,
few, and those ones do line up with the wedding ceremonies. But that's exactly where it came from, actually.
yeah.
So all of the ceremonies that they're doing now really dates back to around 1500 BC to 500 BC when they were being written down.
Oh, wow.
Hmm. All right. So continuing here, there are many similar stories throughout the Vedas, Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita that show up in many other scriptures. In Hinduism, it is more common to find origin stories per deity. So rather than one full origin story, it's more common to find an origin story per deity that in many cases symbolizes the origin of what that being represents. For example, there's a god called Agni, right? Agni is the god of fire. So the whole story of the origin story is the origin story of how fire even came about, but it's personified in an actual deity. So whether that deity is an actual entity and a being or a star being, an extraterrestrial that existed, or if it's completely metaphoric, that's up to your own decision, really, what you
What are
think it
your
is.
thoughts on that? Do you think there was an extraterrestrial being that came down and
Yeah, I
passed this
think
knowledge forward, or do you think it's more mythological than anything else?
it's so there are so many Indian gods, right? That
Yeah,
it's
there's like
kind of
thousands of
difficult to
them.
see because I do believe that the Anunnaki story is connected to India,
Mhm.
and the fall of Atlantis is connected to the Battle of Mahabharata, which is the Indian epic that the Bhagavad Gita, which is the Bible, the Indian Bible, is within. The
Yeah.
Mahabharata is a huge text, and the Bhagavad Gita is just one section, and that's the Bible. So I think, and you look at all those Vimanas there, the UFO crafts, the lightning bolts. So it looks like there was some sort of extraterrestrial influence there going on. But whether all of these beings were extraterrestrials or over a period of thousands of years in a ritualistic society, people started creating more and more deities based on different things that they needed for themselves in their life.
Okay, okay, I
You know
get
what I
it.
mean?
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
I follow you there.
So it's difficult to really track. You could probably become a scholar of this information and then find maybe get some information, but with all those gods, to know if whether there was some reality to them or not. But what I'll show you in a second, though, are the slides that show that some of these gods were the same as the Greek gods, and I believe the Greek gods were actually these star beings. So let's go. We'll get to that in a second and show you those slides.
But
Okay,
I
so
feel the same. I think it's the same gods that we have in India, in Africa, in
it
Europe,
is.
North
It
America,
is.
South America. It's just the same
Hmm.
entities, just different titles, different names, and
Yeah.
look just a little bit different. But overall, they're all the same.
Exactly. And I'll show you some evidence for that right now. So in Hinduism, we have Brahma, which is an impersonal force. All of creation is within it. All deities and manifestations within it. And there's the Trinity, right? So Brahma is all that is. Brahman is an individual entity of all that is. Vishnu is an individual entity of all that is, and so is Shiva. And that's the Trinity. You know, you have the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. It's the same thing within Hinduism, except the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost are all patriarchal symbols of masculine energy, where Shiva, Brahma, and Vishnu are both female and male.
Wasn't the original name for India before the British came was Brahma?
Oh, it was no,
Because I know India is not the original name. It used to be something different.
they called it Hindustan for a long time,
Yeah, I think
and
that's
so
the British term, but I think prior to the British when they showed up, it was something different, like Brahma. I'll actually Google it.
yeah, look into that.
I'll mute
Find that out
myself
right
and
now.
I'll quickly look in.
So to answer to what you were talking about earlier, actually the Greek and the Hindu gods are the same, and we're going to get into the migration routes of how this could possibly have happened. When I was looking into this, all of a sudden I came across this information that a lot of the Greek gods have the exact same story as the Indian gods. But how can a civilization that spearheaded the Western world, in which that we've been told is so separate and so different from the Eastern world, have the same gods, right? So I'll give you a few examples here. We have Zeus and Indra. Zeus, of course, everybody knows Zeus. Indra is the king of the gods in India. Both were the kings of of gods. Both king of sky storms and thunder and lightning and rain. Zeus used a thunderbolt and Indra used the Varja, which is the same thing. Both lived on mountains and both were very promiscuous. So that's the connection between them. And if you look at all the other personality traits, they're all the same. Another two individuals, Hermes and Narada. Hermes was a messenger of the gods, and also so was Narada. So they were both known as tricksters. They both created music. They both created the instrument called the lyra, which was Pythagoras's favorite instrument. So we have Hermes, who created the lyra, Pythagoras, who was, from the Greek civilization, and we also have the lyra spoke about in the Eastern world, but it's specifically from a different god called Narada, who is actually the same person. And then we also have Surya and Helios, which are the sun gods, both driving chariots. Athena and Saraswati. Athena was the arts and industry. Saraswati was wisdom, music, and art. Athena born fully grown in armor. And Saraswati born fully grown in armor from someone's mouth. And you can see here,
Neil, do
these
you know if Lyra is connected to the Lyrian
yeah, that's a good
constellation?
That's a well, okay. So the Lyra constellation is actually a symbol of an eagle playing the lyra. That's why it's called Lyra. Okay,
Okay.
so it's connected on that level.
I found the original name for India. It
What is
says
it?
in the description here, it was called Bharat. Look
Oh
at it.
yes,
We
yes.
operate with two names, the original name Bharat and the given name India. The
Hmm.
invaders of Bharat who came up to the river Sindhu somehow managed to pronounce Sindhu as Hindu and then
Yep.
Indus, and then finally India is stuck for us centuries now.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying earlier is that the once you changed it from Sindhu to Hindu, were basically they couldn't pronounce it, so they changed the word, and even now we're still utilizing it, but it's not even anywhere near what the original thing was. We also have here Apollo and Surya, and you can see both of them. They basically check out with all the same personality traits, and both of them are driving chariots. We have Rhea and Aditi, also two gods that are exactly the same. We have Zeus and Indra, as I shared earlier. They're the same gods. And then even when it goes to the Egyptian gods here, you can see that the similarities within these gods too, and also in the names. Right. So I showed you how the land of Kush possibly migrated to the Indus civilization, but the land of Kush were what? They actually were following the Egyptian gods. They were a part of the Egyptian empire for many, thousands or hundreds of years at least. So the gods were definitely transferred over. But even the name, even Sanskrit, and that cultivated and started in the Indus civilization, definitely had a lot of connections to ancient Egyptian language. And you see here Ra, you have Brahma, right? You have Atum, who is also Shiva. You have Nu, who is Vishnu, right? And then you have Nu being a blue god as well, which is interesting because the color blue was not utilized until sometime in ancient Greece and not even spoke about. Then for thousands of years, no one would actually refer to blue as the color of blue. What they would do is they would refer to blue as a shade of black or the color of wine or something like that. If you look at a lot of poetry from the Greek times, when they're talking about the color blue, they're explaining it. They're never actually saying it. So the question is, were they blind to the color blue? And we don't think that ancient humans were blind to the color blue. It seems that there was some sacred awareness there that they weren't willing to completely label blue until later in our devolution in consciousness. So, but if you look at ancient hieroglyphs and ancient artwork, there's only two civilizations that use blue as an actual color and a pigment, a pure blue color on their artwork, and that was Egypt and India. And therein lies the connection to the fact that the Indus civilization, which is right here, most likely was first seeded by descendants of Kush, who were also connected to the Indus, to the Kemetic Egyptian civilization. So, and you can jump in anytime you want, Omar, but I'm just
Yeah,
going to keep going.
interestingly enough, I just Googled the color blue, and it
Hmm.
says lapis first appeared as a true blue pigment in the 6th century, gracing Buddhist frescoes and Bamiyan, Afghanistan, around 700 years
Yeah,
later. It
boom,
would travel to Venice and soon became the most sought after color in
exactly.
Middle Europe. And I believe the Egyptians called it lapis lazuli, where
Yeah.
they imported it from Afghanistan into Egypt.
Well, you know where Mohenjo-daro is, right?
That's right. So it's,
Afghanistan.
yeah, like north of Lahore.
Exactly. This right here, this place is where that happened. They
Yeah.
had pure blue here, and from here they went down to the east. So there is now the smoking gun in regards to the fact that this civilization did not just go south into India. This civilization also went all the way to Europe and seeded the religions of the Western world as well as Hinduism. So the Aryan, then we have that whole Aryan migration or invasion theory, which is that Indo-Aryans were part of an expansion into the Indus Valley around 1800 to 1500 BC. So at this time, the Indus civilization right here had been around for around 1,000 plus years. 3000 BC is when it really started. 2500 BC is when it became something really big. 1300 BC is almost when it's completely evacuated. But from 1800 to 1500, you can see that the Aryans started coming in from the Caucasus Mountains and causing some sort of migration to happen in this area. When was technically the fall of Mohenjo-daro and the Indus civilization? 1500 BCE. Goes very hand in hand with the migration of people into that area. But
Hmm.
what they did at that point was they actually, so the Indo-Europeans came down here into Mohenjo-daro and integrated with whoever was here, invaded them, whatever happened, and then they went further east into what's currently Nepal, Tibet, and northern India states as well, and they started populating, which is the Ganges Plain, this over here. And while they were in this area, very lush area, very fruitful land that they could grow into, what did they start doing? They started creating the Vedas. So around 1500 BCE, they come into this area, and then the combination of the civilizations together starts the creation of the Vedas. And then they move into this area, and around all the way until 500 BC, for 1,000 years, the Vedas were being written down. An old verbal text that was just communicated verbally started being passed down to people so that it could be written on paper, and it happened over here. So the Indo-Aryans moved to the Ganges plain down south, continuing the creation of the Vedas until 500 BCE, right where right when the right when we left the Bronze Age, which is the Bronze Age, into the Dark Age, the Kali Yuga. So 500 BCE to 700 BCE was the time that the Bronze Age of man actually entered the Dark Ages, the Kali Yuga. So it went hand in hand with this happening. So it seems like the Vedas were being written because they knew that we were leaving one age and we were going into a darker age. So what they started doing is writing down all this spiritual wisdom to create a book and a template of how to go back to, enlightenment, how to receive moksha and liberation, even if though we're in such a dense age.
Do you know if the excuse me? Do you know if the Ganges River, because it's considered very sacred to the Indian people, if there's a connection to this somehow?
Say that one more time.
You know, the Ganges River, it's a very sacred to the Indian
Oh
people,
yeah,
bathe in it and things like that.
it
Is
is. It
there a
is. Okay,
connection
so
to that somehow?
yes, because the root of the Ganges River is supposedly where Shiva lives, right? Shiva, the text of Shiva was being written at this time in this area.
Okay, okay, cool.
Yeah, so it's completely what you just said. So there was the early Vedic time. So okay, now see if you can track this with me, guys. Okay, because there's a lot of dates here. We have around 3,000 BCE. We have the Indus civilization manifesting. 2,500 BCE, we have the Indus civilization with Mohenjo-daro and Harappa actually becoming huge, beautiful states without any monarchy, without any hierarchy, but elected representatives, like a true democracy, right? Way before anything. Actually, the template for what? Greek civilization. So they started doing that. And then all of a sudden, around 1,000 years later, after they've cultivated this great civilization and had all this spiritual awareness there, the Aryans start coming down south, pushing them south, migrating with them, inhabiting this area. But what happened at that time was the early Vedic period had just finished. The early Vedic period happened in the civilization as 1750 BCE, but then there was a later Vedic area of a 100 to 500 BCE. So during the early Vedic period of 1750 BCE to 1000 BCE, these individuals were dispersing all over the world. They were going to the Western world. They were going to current Turkey. They were going to North Europe, and then they were going into this area right here. So the early Vedic awareness was taken all over the world. But then, after they dispersed, the later Vedic period from 100 to 500 BCE, which Hinduism was based on, right? The later Vedic period from 100 to 500 BCE that Hinduism was based on became the context of what created modern day India and modern day Hinduism. So my theory is that I think is backed up with a lot of evidence is that the early Vedic awareness from 1750 to 1000 BC made its way all the way east as far as Greece, maybe even further. But then the later Vedic awareness happened post migration, so that awareness was exclusively for the people that inhabited India.
You know if the Silk Road has anything to do with this? That's connected to Europe and Africa.
Well, what is the years of the Silk Road? You know?
I can't. Let me quickly take a
Yeah,
look.
take a look. So, and then we have about 10 more minutes, guys, and then we have the next guest coming up. So, and then we have, of course, the migration routes that I was showing over here. So now let's go to this area right here, right? Mohenjo-daro. So we're at 1750 BCE. We have the civilization of going into the Ganges plain. But at the same time, another group of people went this way. You can see this line right here, went this way.
130 BC.
Yeah, so that's completely different time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they started going this way and inhabiting this whole area. So my theory is that whatever was cultivated in here spiritually actually dispersed and went all over the world from that area around 1500 probably BCE, and they actually founded what became the Greek civilization. And just to give you a little context of the origins of Greek civilization is that the Minoans were the first Greek civilization. Okay, they didn't live on mainland Greece, but on a nearby island of Crete between 2200 BCE and 1450 BCE. So look at the dates again, right? So we have the creation of and the downfall of the Indus civilization around 1500 BCE. These individuals were, coming into that area at the same time. It looks like it was overlapping a little bit. They were known as the Minoans after the legendary king Minos. After the Minoans came into the Mycenaean civilization, after the Minoans came the Mycenaean civilization from mainland Greece. They were fine builders and traders, but they were also great soldiers. They famously fought in the Battle of Troy, which may have actually been the exact same battle from the Mahabharata. Homer, as an important Greek writer, told stories of the Mycenaean age in his books in the Iliad and the Odyssey. They likely migrated. These individuals that eventually became the Greek civilization most likely migrated from Anatolia to Greece and Crete thousands of years prior to the Bronze Age. And here
Now,
is an article. Yeah,
would they be related to the Arcadians,
yeah.
the
So
Minoans? Because we know that before the Greek civilization, there was these nomadic people that were, known as the Arcadians, and then
mhm.
they existed. And after them, the Greek civilization came. So I'm wondering if the Minoans were after the Arcadians, or are they the Arcadians that turned into the Greek civilization?
No, I believe there were other tribes that were currently there that have even older ancestry, and some tribes that came directly out of Africa, like thousands of years before that, right? And so these ones were probably taking the culture from the east to the west. And as they went west, they either merged with these civilizations, they either went to war with these civilizations, or they just shared information. Or but I think that they emerged with them over time. But I don't think the Arcadians were the same people. They were
Okay.
currently there in that area. hmm So, and
The
there's just so many,
Arcadians would be more like Aborigines.
yeah, there's so many
That's just noted that
dynamics.
they ate, berries and nuts and acorns and such. So,
Yeah,
that seems like it's like a lot further back in time to where they would have been Aborigines.
exactly. And there's so many dynamics. Like you bring up a good point. It's so difficult to explain our history because there were people in areas already when others migrated. So multiple cultures intermingled all the time, and
Mhm.
we can't really track all of those cultures. In some cases you can, but a lot of times they completely got integrated into whatever culture was coming there. So to track exactly how the culture spread, how religion spread over the world, it's not as easy to do. You know.
Sounds easier than done.
Yeah, exactly. So here's an article from physics.org that says ancient DNA analysis reveals the Minoan and Mycenaean origins. And what does their origins say? Well, their origins say that they come from a land that is now known as Turkey that was used to be called Anatolia around 2000 BC, the same time around, when the Indus civilization that's all the way here in Afghanistan and part of southern Iraq right there started dissipating because they took a good 500-600 years before they completely dissipated and started going west and east. So there could be a chance that either the Anatolian civilization that became those other civilizations moved from the Indus civilization and made their way east there, or there was some sort of trade going on between these civilizations in which they started adopting a lot of the spiritual practices and gods, because what we're talking about here is the early Vedic period in which these gods were defined and those gods were taken to Greece. So the question is, how did that occur? Okay, and we can look here.
Question.
Yeah, we can look
There had to
here.
have been an exchange of communication or some sort
Culture
of contact
exchange.
in order for that to happen, or these ETs or these gods were in multiple places at the same time. They do a shift
Yeah.
in Africa, then they
Well,
do a shift in Asia, and kind of
true,
what
but
happened.
the gods were probably here many thousands of years before this happened. So it was probably that a civilization or multiple civilizations had this awareness of these gods, and then they just took it with them wherever they went. Or like, well, if the Mohenjo-daro in the civilization did come out of Egypt, out of Kemet, and went over there and cultivated that landmass in Mohenjo-daro, it just makes sense that they would directly be connected to the Egyptian gods, which are connected to all these star beings, right? And and the Egyptian gods went all over Europe, but different civilizations that came out of Egypt as well, or even other places, probably had those same gods too, and then went and created their own pantheon of gods or their own definition of what those gods are, change the name, like this is only 1% of the picture, because don't forget the Norse gods and the Viking gods, they are very similar too. So we can even track and look at the whole Viking civilization and what happened to them, and the fact that Vikings almost went all over the world. They went to America, US for sure, They went to South Russia, they went to Turkey, and everywhere they went, they took the gods with them. And they were such a superior race in regards to their ability to fight, right? That they actually embedded and infused their own spiritual beliefs into many, many cultures. So I want to just make a note here, and I'm going to end it right now. Actually, I have a few more
Before you do
minutes.
that, I just got a quick question.
Yeah.
You were mentioning, excuse me, Mohenjo-daro. Now we know that the writing that's being found at Mohenjo-daro, it has been found in South America and also in Easter Island as well.
Mhm.
Is there some sort of a connection happening here? Do you think the civilization that was at Mohenjo-daro ended up going to Easter Island, or the Easter Island civilization came over to Mohenjo-daro?
Yeah, well, I'm starting to lean on the fact that there was probably a worldwide civilization and there was a lot of communication happening before we fell from certain ages. You know,
Mhm.
definitely in the silver, definitely 3000 to 6000 BCE. I think that we were at the level of consciousness where we would have that. So there was a lot of information shared, but there's many different options there. Like it could be that thousands of years before there were extraterrestrials on the planet that left this same information across many different civilizations. It could be that maybe the land of Atlantis, people started dispersing all over the world and just took their information there. But I do think that there is a connection.
Hey, Neil, why don't you join us on the ancient civilization panel for Sunday? And just kind of both of you maybe drop in. We're not going to go so much into extraterrestrial civilizations, but we're going to go into like what have been the roots of ancient Egypt, like where did that come from? And some maybe speculation on extraterrestrials. So that might be good to add all this research from both of you into that.
That sounds fantastic, Alan.
We got a researcher who is who just wrote a book called Under the Sphinx, this guy Manu,
Hmm.
and he's saying the original Sphinx was a lioness that was and then what we see today as the Sphinx was recarved by a different dynasty. But basically the lioness was protecting the hall of records that Edgar Casey talked about, which is probably Atlantean, that is under the left part of the Sphinx. So I got the Hertogs, I got this guy Manu. And what's both of your backgrounds on Egypt there?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And actually, do you know Paul Anthony Wallace at all? He
No.
created a book, The Scars of Eden. He
Number
has a
one
show.
bestseller right now in the
He
world.
has a show on Gaia, and he's also going to join us. So it will be a discussion with us. But he has
Great.
a lot of awareness on biblical history and how it relates to our,
Oh,
just the
what's
whole
his
timeline
name?
of history.
What's his name?
Paul Anthony Wallace is pretty well known. He
Oh,
has a
Also,
show on
that
Gaia and he has a
the
YouTube
Fifth Kind
channel.
TV.
Paul. Okay, great.
Hmm.
This one guy's a real Egyptian. He actually can read hieroglyphics, Manu. So
Oh, no way! That's amazing.
yeah, it is amazing. And there's a whole different way of thinking. Language dictates thought, and the Egyptians thought differently. So in order for us to really understand what they're talking about, we have to understand their language.
Alan, let me ask you, do you
I
think
agree.
the hieroglyphs that are in Egypt, they're more written as, I don't know what the word is called, but like FBI, CIA, DEA.
I think they're more symbolic. They're not as specific. These images mean more than the words. We
Mhm.
put words and we think, but images have multiple meanings. Is that, I think?
Acronyms. That's what I'm talking about. If they could be acronyms.
Yeah.
Well, some of the cartouches are acronyms, I think.
Laird Scranton talks about that a lot, and then he
Oh,
suggested that they could be acronyms rather than like the stories as Egyptologists are trying to pass.
Oh yeah, I love Laird Scranton. What a genius. I had a whole interview with him about the whole idea about clusters of meanings and how language needs to be reinterpreted as in a wider understanding than what we make words mean. And
Mhm.
and so I think hieroglyphics have, like, what we're using as emojis today. When you have an emoji and you give someone like a thumbs up, that just doesn't mean yes. It can mean yes, but it can mean a multiple of different meanings. And I think hieroglyphics and that kind of symbolic language is more it may be less concrete, but it's more felt, it's more sensed than saying this means this and this.
Like an emotional connection, an emotional
Yeah,
response.
that too. Yeah. And I think what I think the Hebrew alphabet was a abstraction of those symbols in Egypt, and they created then words and
Sanskrit.
sounds. And what?
And Sanskrit too.
And Sanskrit, but I think the Hebrew actually is derived from Egypt. I don't know where Sanskrit's derived from.
Well, that's the thing. That's what I was talking in my presentation there, that the Indus civilization that cultivated and created Sanskrit were direct descendants of the land of Kush, which was the civilization south of Egypt that was a part of the Egyptian empire for thousands of years.
Well,
So-
if you listen to Ramtha, though, if you know Ramtha, the channel was, he says the Indus civilization started from the Lemurians uprising against the Atlanteans. This was 35,000 years ago, and marching east to the Indus Valley and settling as basically Lemurians in the Indus Valley.
Well, there's been see, you can't carbon date non-inorganic matter, but you can carbon date all the skeletal remains in Mohenjo-daro, and it does go back to around 3000 BC.
Well, I'm talking about 35,000 BC.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying that the remains that they're finding in the city date back to that. So I wonder what the connection would be in regards to 35,000 BCE and how we can track that, you know?
Well, there are waves of migration. This is what human civilization has been about. It's been about, look at the last 100 years, all the different migrations that have happened around the plating. So I'm sure there are phases and waves and peaks of civilization and then decline.
Definitely.
I wonder where we are right now. Are we in a peak or decline? But that's another conversation.
You guys might be really interested in this gentleman I've got coming on pretty soon. His name is Patrick Giles, and he just recently wrote a dictionary on the Egyptian hieroglyphs. I'll forward that link over to you, Alan, so you might be interested in that.
Well, maybe he wants to join us too. I mean,
I'll shoot him a message and see if he's interested.
Okay, it could be a real focus on Egypt. And
yeah, we have an hour and we have around 5-6 people right now. So as long as you can curate that energy well and facilitate the energy well, let's do it.
Isn't it at the end of the day? We could have more than
No,
an
it's
hour.
not. It's not. It's
it's not.
We have someone after that.
Oh, who do we have after it?
Let me see. We got
because it'd be nice to go more than an hour.
We have 2 people after that. We have Costa after that, and then we have Steve Mera.
Oh, all right. Well,
I'll see what I can do. Maybe we can shift things around to make it longer.
Maybe we can have an after party after all's done. And
but we can't start earlier than 2:40. So let's see, because the Hertogs are doing their event. So are we interviewing is Paul Hynek coming on?
Yeah, I'm waiting for him to come in. He messaged me yesterday saying, see you there, but he's not in the room and not responding right now. So
let's look at what the chat says. Anyway, please share links. Thanks. Sleep is asking about sleeping phoenix. Sarah Shore is asking about a sleeping phoenix. What does that mean? A sleeping phoenix.
Well, what's the question? Say that again.
No, in the chat, Sarah Shore is asking about a sleeping phoenix. That sounds interesting. What does that have to do with anything?
Not sure. Need more context to that.
It says,
I'm just scrolling up to see if I can find context to that.
Yeah, so let me read this question from Eric's right here.
Maybe you want to retype it into the chat, please?
Yeah, please do. And I'll read this question. Since the same themes, in particular, the Trinity and similar deities across the board, are appearing without being disrespectful, what gives? Do you have any ideas to what is the underlying agenda? Example was, this is a way to harvest human energy power across culture while keeping them divided. Control is not very creative, so told the same story to everyone and changed up the names to suit different tongues. Yeah, so I think, Eric's, what you're asking is that was this whole, one original pantheon of gods, and then how it split all over the world. Was this kind of done in order to create some division? that kind of goes to the Sumerian story, right? That the gods basically gave us language in different types of cultures so that we couldn't communicate and get back to the oneness. And then there's a prophecy that when we get over the communication barrier, when we conquer the communication barrier, that the evolution of consciousness would be exponential. And Alan, I've been saying just the last couple of years that now they have those devices that actually Sol and I have coming in the mail next week that you can put in your ear and it translates in real time when you're speaking to people.
Oh, those are
Yeah.
incredible.
So I'm like, oh, that's the sign of the times. Where like part of the Sumerian prophecy was that, you know, we're going to have different languages and not be able to communicate. And until we can communicate, the new world will emerge. And I believe part of it is that we now have technology to communicate with each other. And pretty soon, like, it's just people who are crowdfunding and getting, because it's a crowdfunding campaign and I'm doing it. This is just the beginning stages. Within 10 to 20 years, I feel everybody's going to have one of those devices and we can freely communicate with everyone.
Well, you know, there's a Google Translate app you can get on your phone where you hold it in front of a foreign language and it translates.
Right.
I know.
The other one, literally, as they're speaking, it tells you what they're saying in your ear in their language.
Yeah,
yeah, I'm going to get it.
And then go on a bus.
What is that called, that device?
It's called the time kettle. Just, I'll tell you what it's called. It's the time kettle thing.
I had to come on. Didn't want to be in the silent corner back here by myself. This is so exciting to hear what you guys are talking about. You know, didn't they have those translators at the United Nations and all the international, like,
Haley? Yeah,
beta versions.
In our hands.
Yeah, those are the beta versions of it all. And now the technology is evolving, you know?
I just looked up the Sleeping Sphinx, and from what it looks like, it says the Sleeping Sphinx was first published in 1947, is a detective story by John Dickinson Carr, which features Carr's series Detective Gideon Fell. This novel is a mystery of the type known as a whodunit. That's all I have on the Sleeping Sphinx. So maybe if whoever asked that on YouTube, if you can please clarify, and then maybe we can.
So we have another question here. Chris is asking, what's under the Sphinx? I think that is the good question for Sunday. Come back Sunday. You guys can speculate on it right now if you want, but on Sunday, we're going to do an hour talk with the Hertags, Paul Anthony Wallace, Omar, myself, a few other people. And a lot of them have a lot of information about the Sphinx, especially JJ Hertag. He actually,
especially this guy who wrote the book, a new book called Under the Sphinx. And he goes back to pre-dynastic Egypt and says what the Sphinx really looked like. It was a lioness.
Yes, I've read that.
Protecting the Hall of Records. So I don't know if the Hall of Records was built first and then they created this lioness to protect it, you know, the god protecting it, or the lioness was there. I don't know. Let's see what he has to say.